Hey guys, let's make it simple. Gambling is the lottery ticket. Flashy, thrilling, and almost guaranteed to take your money. Trading, when done correctly, is boring because boring makes you rich. But here's the twist. Most people secretly prefer the thrill, even when it destroys them. So are you here for excitement or for freedom? Let's find out. The thrill versus the grind. People always claim they want calm, a steady job, predictable bills, smooth routines. We chant stability like a prayer, yet underneath the surface, most of us itch for a little chaos. Not too much, just enough to feel alive. Because let's be honest, predictability may keep you safe, but it doesn't exactly get the blood racing. And when the choice shows up between stable returns and a shot at fireworks, you'd be surprised how many step into the chaos, smiling while saying they hate it. Now picture gambling as fireworks. Bright explosions, fast noise, all wonder and adrenaline. The thing with fireworks is they vanish quickly. The spark fades, the smoke lingers, and your wallet is a little lighter if you were the one buying them. Trading, when done correctly, doesn't look anything like that. It looks more like a dull lamp in the corner of a quiet room. Constant light, plain, almost boring. Yet it's the lamp that allows you to read, to see where you're going, to live without stumbling. You wouldn't call it glamorous, but you'd miss it the second it went dark. Here's the tension. If trading performed right, is this lamp steady, useful, reliable? Why do so many pull the plug and reach for the fireworks instead? Why does the steady profit feel dull next to the casino glow? You would think money on the line would demand rational choices, but often the need for thrill hijacks reason. You see it every day in traders who say they want stability yet chase setups that mirror slot machines. Think about the lottery versus your paycheck. A paycheck is structured. Same time, same source, measured and tied to your effort. It's not thrilling to watch your account post the deposit mundane, ordinary. But the lottery? One ticket clutched, the faint chance of sudden riches. On the surface, trading should work more like the paycheck. Earned in pieces, consistent, tied to process. Yet many approach it like the scratch card they bought at the gas station. Hoping for windfall, leaning on luck, the numbers flesh out the story. Most small traders end up losing. Not because the tools aren't available. Platforms and charts are easier to use now than any other time. It's not about access. The issue is the same as in the casino. The need to feel alive, to grab bursts of dopamine rather than slow accumulations. That tilt toward gambling behavior shows in the quick trades, the doubling down, the chase for one massive win that will wipe away mistakes. The market becomes a slot machine. They keep pulling until the machine eats their balance. Why does this hidden preference matter? Because emotion sells better than logic. People don't buy fireworks for their practicality. They buy them for the thrill when they explode. Inside the market, the same conditioning runs the show. The stomach-lurching highs and lows feel more vivid than the quiet growth of capital. Gains earned slowly don't trigger the same rush. So traders often sabotage their own path. They crave the story of the win, not the math of consistent compounding. Ask yourself, when you place a trade, do you want certainty or excitement? The instinct often leans toward excitement. It's why so many ignore systems that would safeguard them. Discipline doesn't feel alive in the moment, it feels mechanical. The quick bet feels human. That drive to be human in the market, though, is exactly what empties accounts. In casinos, the lights, sounds, and architecture are designed for this. In trading, the triggers sit in your own brain. The flashing green candles, the jolts of fear and greed, the illusion that this position is the one. If you strip the thrill away, what are you left with? Charts, plans, risk controls, percentages. Not thrilling to describe, but these are the pieces from which true wealth grows. Slow repetition, small improvements. Over time, compounding does the heavy lifting that quick wins promise but rarely deliver, which means the less thrill you demand, the better your chances of actually succeeding. A counterintuitive idea, less excitement equals more return, but it makes sense when you think it through, because calm actions build structures. Excitable actions dissolve them. Let's sit with an image. Imagine digging a well. Each day, one shovelful. It doesn't feel exciting: dust, sweat, dirt. Not much to look at. Gambling is like pouring a bucket of water from the river into a hole and screaming, "We found it!" before it seeps away. Trading done right is the shovel. Over time, the hole deepens, groundwater seeps in, and you have something permanent, something that repeats and sustains, which makes the shovel, not the bucket, the true wealth tool. So, if this is true, why do we resist? Because repetition feels dull to the brain. Our minds are wired for survival through surprise. New things catch our attention. Same things feel invisible. That's why the steady paycheck fades from memory while the one lucky lottery ticket glows in your story years after it lost. In markets, this urge for novelty works against you. Tools keep improving, but the success rate stays poor because psychology wins over technology. You start to notice how the parallels line up. Casinos design incentives to keep you spinning. Markets offer no bright lights to guide you, yet your mind builds its own. Every burst of dopamine at a win, every pang at a loss, nudges you toward behavior that mirrors slot players. Before long, you aren't trading at all. You're gambling with charts instead of dice. And when you're gambling without admitting it, the ruin comes even faster. So the paradoxical truth lands. To win, you must embrace less thrill, less drama, less so-called fun. It's the grind that pays, not the gamble. Profits are rooted in boredom, in process, in a lamp burning quiet on the table every single night. Wealth is accumulation without fanfare. Noise is what empties pockets. All of this points to one mini payoff. Real success is built on repetition and restraint, not thrill. The fireworks tempt, but they fade. The lamp glows until morning, and once you see that, you realize discipline isn't just a virtue in trading, it's survival. But discipline only works if you can battle the loudest force inside you, not the market, not the broker, not the spread or the slippage. Your own fear. And that fear is patient, it waits at the edge of every trade, ready to tighten its grip the second you hesitate. 3. Fear. The unpaid partner. Your heart rate spikes before your finger even clicks the mouse. The position moves against you on the screen, small red numbers turning into larger ones, and you feel the pulse in your neck match them step for step. Anyone who's traded knows this rhythm. It's primal. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the game, fear still rides shotgun. You don't banish it, you march alongside it. The mistake is pretending it's gone. Fear doesn't exit the room with experience. It doesn't bow politely and make space for your hard-earned wisdom. It lingers, patient, waiting for the moment you're weak. Ask any trader at any level. The chill never fully disappears. If anything, the more you think you've killed it, the louder it gets. Numb it, suppress it, deny it, and suddenly it multiplies. You catch yourself reacting faster, cutting orders in panic, fighting against ghosts. This is the paradox of markets. The harder you chase control over fear, the tighter its grip wraps around your decisions. Imagine a confession whispered after hours. Fear isn't about the presence or absence of risk. The market always carries risk, that's a given. What shifts is how you handle the voice in your head when risk shows up. Fear is not the enemy. Mismanaged fear is. Think of fire. Place it in the hearth and it gives you warmth, security, a meal at the table. Ignore it, and sparks leap into curtains, flames eat beams, and suddenly you're standing in the ash pile of your own house. Traders need fire, they just hate the burn when it slips the frame. The skill lies in tending the flame, yet humans repeat the same mistakes with remarkable loyalty. Some patterns are so common they feel scripted. A new trader holds a loser too long, waiting for it to come back, whispering just one more tick. While slicing winners early, frightened they'll vanish. You exit the trade that earns, clutch the trade that bleeds. It's backward, but it's human. What's worse is how often it repeats. Not once, not twice, over and over, like déjà vu. The same button presses, the same regrets, the same story told after the damage is done. You've probably lived it. That sick relief closing a small win, quickly locked in, pocket change compared to the hours of worry. Then the opposite feeling, keeping the loser alive longer than reason allows. The math is ugly. Small gains clipped, big losses festering. The outcome is an account skewed not by the market alone, but by your own heartbeat. The enemy doesn't wear a dealer's vest. It looks back at you in the monitor's reflection. The deep question becomes, if fear never leaves, how can anyone step into these markets and actually survive? If every trade sets your nerves on alert, doesn't that mean losing is inevitable? Not quite. The trap is in believing fear is meant to be conquered like some villain in a video game. Beat it once, and you're crowned free forever. But markets don't work that way. You don't slay fear. You train it, harness it, and treat it more like an unpaid partner seated across from you. Annoying, loud, sometimes infuriating, but always there. This training isn't glamorous. It's not the movie image of quick intuition and perfect timing. It's mundane, repetitive, something closer to dog training than to battlefield heroics. The point isn't removal, it's discipline. Can you keep your hands still when the screen screams for attention? Can you let logic act while your pulse pleads the opposite? That gap between impulse and action is where mastery hides. Some call it stoic, others call it self-control. Whatever the label, it's the only skill that matters once mechanics are in place. Think about habits in daily life. Most of what you do isn't conscious at all. Your brain runs on shortcuts, brush your teeth with the same hand, tie the same knot, take the same turn toward work without thinking. In markets, fear shapes habits just as deeply. Each time you bail early or cling to hope, the action carves a groove in the brain. Rub it often enough and the groove becomes a canyon. And once it's a canyon, good luck climbing back out. What felt like one hasty decision turns into a pattern you'll live with. Repetition locks it in. So the practice isn't about making fear vanish, it's about teaching your body how to sit in discomfort long enough to do what's right. Think of a fire again. The hearth isn't natural, it's crafted. A box, stone walls, a grate, limits forced on the flame so that warmth doesn't slip into devastation. Trading discipline is nothing more than building your own hearth. Sturdy walls, strict rules, structures that keep energy useful. Without them, fire licks outside and you're pulling buckets in a panic. Most traders resist that lesson. They want the big leap, the trick to never feeling dread, the shortcut to immunity. But immunity never comes. What comes instead is conditioning. Each time you stick to your plan despite the pulse in your temples, you lay a brick in the hearth. Each time you flinch and break rules, you carve another canyon. That's why this business doesn't forgive sloppy routines. Because the brain doesn't care if repetition is good or bad, it just cements whatever you feed it. Your partnership with fear is permanent. Accept that, and suddenly the game looks different. You stop chasing calm, stop fantasizing about perfection, and start building guardrails that hold under stress. You learn to test small, burn in rehearsal, keep the flame contained until it warms instead of consumes. It's not a romantic picture, but it's the truth. And once you accept the companion who never leaves, you free yourself to focus on craft rather than illusion. So the irony is plain. The very thing you try hardest to kill is the thing you need beside you. The restless pulse may never soften, but that's your proof you're alive in the market. You don't beat fear. You observe it. You assign it space. You build systems that keep it useful. Traders who grasp this survive longer, even thrive. Traders who deny it burn quickly, leaving only smoke and shut accounts behind. Fear is your unpaid partner. It costs you often dearly, but walk alongside it correctly and it fuels you. Ignore it, and fire runs wild. And that leads directly to the next hard truth. Repetition isn't magic, because practice doesn't make perfect. It makes permanent. 4. When habits harden into chains, is the way you trade right now the way you'll trade forever? That's not just a throwaway line. It's a real question that cuts through the noise. Because if you're honest, you already know the answer. You practice the same decisions day after day, and those decisions are building grooves in your head. Every click, every knee-jerk exit, every impulse trade, it's cement work, not temporary, permanent. We've all heard the phrase, practice makes perfect. It sounds tidy, comforting even. But in reality, practice makes permanent. Do something poorly long enough, and your brain doesn't magically fix it. Quite the opposite, it fossilizes the mistake. You become more locked into the error. You swing the hammer the wrong way 10,000 times, and now you're a master of bad carpentry. Apply that to markets and you can see the damage clearly. A single bad habit, repeated, mutates into a prison cell. Hours on charts don't guarantee wisdom. They can just as easily deepen illusions. You stare at a screen for 40 straight hours and convince yourself you see order where none exists. Worse, repetition feeds confidence. You know, your system works because you've logged countless hours doing it. But confidence built on repetition of error is even more dangerous than ignorance. You're not just wrong, you're consistently wrong and proud of it. And in the market, that pride has a price tag. Think about someone at a piano. They sit every day hammering the same piece, but they misplace their fingers, miss notes, and never bother to check. 10 years later, are they a virtuoso? No. They've become fluent in being mediocre. Every wrong move sunk in deeper, until change feels impossible. Trading is no different. Consistent error produces consistent results. And in markets, consistency in error means consistent loss. It's not complexity that ruins traders, it's habit. The brain loves shortcuts. Your mind builds little pathways that save energy. If it can make a routine, it will. Brushing your teeth, driving to work, walking familiar streets, all of it works on autopilot. Helpful in daily life, dangerous under pressure in markets. If your shortcut is flawed, you'll still take it, because the brain rewards familiarity with a hit of comfort. You don't pause to ask, is this logical? You act because it feels automatic. That's why bad habits bite harder than most want to admit. Your mind isn't always your ally when stress floods in. Put yourself in a losing position, and adrenaline drives you back to the shortcuts carved deepest. You cut the winner fast. You hold the loser too long. You repeat history not once, but over and over. The mind betrays you not deliberately, but out of laziness. It chooses what it knows, and under stress, what it knows best are the grooves you've etched day after day. Veteran traders will tell you something that sounds simple but carries weight. Learning strategies is half the battle. The other half is unlearning your own worst impulses. It's harder than it looks. Knowledge doesn't replace reaction. You can know the theory cold and still freeze in the heat. Old patterns pull you back. Like gravity, reckless decisions you thought were buried wake up when the screen goes red and numbers bleed. Your own mind, built to protect you, turns against you because it doesn't differentiate good from bad repetition. It just ingrains. The same way you don't consciously tie your shoes anymore, you don't consciously let a loser ride too long. It feels natural. It feels like what you do. And once something becomes who you are, changing it feels like tearing skin from bone. That's how habits become chains, tight, heavy, and worn by choice rather than force. So here's the tension. If repetition cements both skill and failure equally, how do you stop yourself from turning phantom signals into reflexes? How do you avoid becoming the trader who sees setups where there are none, but acts anyway because habit demands it? It starts with awareness, not the casual kind. The deliberate kind, seeing your own impulses before you act on them. Stopping at the brink, asking whether this urge is trained error or disciplined choice. Discipline is less about rules written on paper and more about rules engraved in your response. If you can pause when fear surges, if you can recognize this is the shortcut speaking, then you have a fighting chance. That awareness is the wedge that pries open the chain links. Without it, you loop forever. The market doesn't punish ignorance. It punishes stubborn repetition of error. Awareness is rare because it bores us. It feels tedious to log every trade, to stare back at your missteps and document them carefully. People want action, not reflection. But that reflection is the only thing that slices open the grooves and interrupts the automatic. Awareness separates the impulse-driven gambler from the disciplined trader. And you know what? It doesn't look exciting. No flashing lights, no big hit of dopamine, just patience, recorded mistakes, and small corrections layered slowly. Discipline keeps you from believing that time alone equals progress. Without awareness, every tick logged, every screen hour, every late night becomes rehearsal not for success, but for bigger collapse. Don't fool yourself into thinking hours invested equal wisdom gained. They only equal grooves carved. The question is whether you're pleased with the shape of those grooves. Even pros wrestle with this. They know their bad habits don't vanish with status. They simply become quieter, more disguised. That's why long careers require constant pruning, removing weeds again and again. The harvest isn't just knowledge acquired. It's error uprooted. It's shortcuts burned away before they rot the foundation. Not glamorous, but necessary. The human mind prefers patterns, even false ones. We'd rather cling to a bad habit than confront the chaos of uncertainty. That's how habits harden. Repeat enough, ignore the signal that says, this isn't working, and suddenly the illusion feels more real than the truth. You win a handful of trades by chance, and the shortcut convinces you it's skill. Before long, that phantom becomes reflex. You act without thinking, because thinking feels foreign. So the mini payoff here is blunt. Repetition doesn't save you on its own. Awareness and discipline do. Practice is neutral. It can build you or break you. What shape it takes is entirely dependent on what you choose to repeat. Bad impulses practiced daily will dominate you. Good structures practiced daily will sustain you. All practice does is hand you the chains. Whether they hold you down or keep you steady is up to your awareness. And now, awareness gets tested hardest by one trap in particular. You think you see patterns, neat and clear as constellations, but many of them don't exist at all. They're ghost signals your brain manufactures, wrapping your habits in false certainty. And that's where we head next. The trap of seeing what isn't there. Have you ever stared at wallpaper until the pattern started to wiggle? Maybe a ceiling with tiny little dots that begin morphing into faces if you look long enough. It's unnerving because nothing has actually moved. Your brain just decided it couldn't sit still with randomness, so it invented order. That quirk has a name: apophenia. The human mind is so allergic to chaos that it invents sense out of nonsense. And while that instinct kept our ancestors alive, spotting a predator shape in the brush even when it wasn't there, it also wrecks traders on screens every single day. Think about charts. Lines zig, candles flick, nothing more than price data scrolling out into the void. But leave a human with those lines, and they'll start to whisper meaning. There's a Fibonacci spiral forming, or this neat symmetry proves the reversal is coming. Our brains can't help it. We write horoscopes into price action, convincing ourselves the maths are mystical. In other words, what you stare at long enough becomes destiny. Never mind that half the time destiny is just ink blots thrown on a page. It's the same trick as seeing shapes in clouds. One person sees a horse, another a ship. Neither is correct, but both swear their version is obvious. Traders sit at their desks doing the same ritual. Dots on a ceiling become faces. Candles on a chart become prophecy. You can convince yourself a moving average has unlocked the hidden code of the universe. And yet, if most who follow those lines lose money, what does that say about the signal? Maybe it was never a signal at all. The evidence smacks you plain. Countless traders rely on indicators. Screens light up with oscillators, ratios, colored zones. Yet the outcome for the majority doesn't improve. In fact, they still lose. The indicator doesn't save you if your compulsion to see order outweighs your ability to accept noise. The irony. The more tools you plaster on your screen, the easier it becomes to hallucinate meaning where there isn't any. Layer enough charts, and you can prove both a crash and a rally in the same moment. It all depends on where your eye goes. So here's the painful insight. The impulse to find patterns is baked into biology. It's how humans hunt, remember, learn words and faces. The problem comes when we drag that instinct into an arena designed to defy it. Markets aren't sources of natural order. They don't unfold in neat ratios like seashells. They aren't coded in spiral elegance like galaxies. They're messy, stitched from billions of decisions, many of them random, many of them emotional. And still we demand they tell a story. We crave prophecy where there is only noise. Have you ever caught yourself pushing two puzzle pieces together that don't fit, just to feel progress? That's what a bad read of the market is like. You bend edges, force connections, smile at the shape you've made. But the fit doesn't hold. That's fine for puzzles on a rainy day. It's ruinous when numbers equal capital. The market doesn't change its behavior to flatter your imagination. It isn't calibrated to reward you for spotting faces in wallpaper. And that's the mini twist worth burning in. The market doesn't care what you see, not even a little. You can interpret Fibonacci retracements like sacred scripture, draw perfect lines across charts, prove your case 100 ways. But the market is not wired to tell a story. It is noise that occasionally forms temporary order. That order then dissolves again. It isn't there to validate your vision. It isn't obliged to play fair with your mental shortcuts. So, if you accept patterns are mostly illusions, what actually matters? If the ghosts on the screen aren't laws, what does a trader anchor to? The answer is discipline. Not prediction, not illusionary geometry. Just blunt structures. How much to risk on one trade, how often to size small, how to survive drawdowns without nervous collapse. That's the real arsenal, unglamorous as it seems. Position sizing is not romantic. It does not sell books. It won't impress friends at a bar. But it's the one lever that keeps your capital from vanishing. Risk control is not a story to brag about, yet it's the quiet backbone behind every long-surviving trader. People love to announce predictions because it makes them sound like prophets. Few announce, "I used a consistent fraction of position size and lived another day." But that consistency outlasts any self-proclaimed prophet. Here's a picture to hold. You're in a storm, rain pounding sideways, debris flying. One sailor waves at the sky, declaring he knows where the sun will reappear. Another checks every rope, ties knots, and prepares for surges. Who you want to sail with in that storm is clear. The second sailor may not predict the exact break of clouds, but they will come out alive. The first will drown, clinging to conviction. Markets punish profits. Not instantly, but over time, the insistence on being right leads to bigger and bigger bets until collapse arrives. And all along, traders swear they saw the signal. It feels comforting to believe the wallpaper shifting was a map. But those visions don't protect accounts. Rules do. Self-control does. Structure does. The boring tools win. And once you understand that, you start to treat pattern seeing like a trick of the eyes, not a gift of insight. Ask yourself, how many trades were entered because the chart looked good? How many positions ignored size control because the pattern felt strong? Those are the habits that empty balance sheets. And the cure isn't mystical, it's procedural. You learn to slow your reaction. You learn to ask what you're wagering, not what you're seeing. And if what you're seeing turns out to be real, fine. You win responsibly. If it was smoke, you live to trade again because your exposure was small. That's how professionalism separates itself from gambling. Gamblers stare at faces in clouds and bet the farm. Traders watch just as many false shapes, but they don't hand over their fortune in response. They observe, measure, and size cautiously, because they know the game. Reality is hard to see, illusions are easy to believe, and capital is fragile. At the end of the day, discipline beats prediction. Every time. Not because discipline guarantees profit, but because it guarantees survival long enough for profit to emerge. A handful of well-controlled mistakes costs less than a single all-in error based on clouds. The boring math of risk control will always outlive the excitement of a chart revelation. That lamp flickering steady beats the fireworks one more time. And now, it wasn't just traders who had to learn this lesson. Even the rule makers saw the chaos, saw the wreckage of false confidence, and decided to step in. Regulators realized illusions were eating people alive, so they rewrote the very rules of the game. The rule changes. Imagine your favorite game suddenly changes overnight. Same board, same dice, same players, but the odds against you just doubled. You show up expecting fun, and instead you've walked into a new rulebook you never agreed to. That's what happened when regulators stepped in and rewrote the framework for retail traders. Some rules softened risks, but others stripped away the mask. They took the shine off the easy money fantasy and left traders staring at the bare metal underneath. For years, leverage gave the illusion of power. Tiny accounts could swing giant positions, $100 down, 20,000 up on the table. On paper, it looked like fairness that anyone with a laptop could play at the high tables. But in practice, it worked more like handing gasoline to someone holding a lit match. Leverage amplified thrill more than skill. When the European regulators forced it down from the extravagant 200-to-1 scale to the more cautious 20-to-1, the change worked like daylight through smoke. It exposed how unstable the promises of fast wealth really were. The reaction was disbelief at first. People complained the fun had been stolen. Traders who had built strategies around chasing moon-sized profits woke up to find their rockets had been stripped to kites. The high-octane thrill of compounding massive positions overnight was suddenly gone. But the quieter truth? Many had already been burning out long before. Their accounts drained at record speed under high leverage. The fantasy was the part that got taken away. The reality had always been cruelty dressed up as opportunity. Transparency brought the second shockwave. Rules forced brokers to display the percentage of clients hemorrhaging money. It was like cigarette companies being told to print pictures of diseased lungs on their packs. You couldn't look away from it. Imagine logging into your account and right there, in plain lettering, seeing a harsh percentage that confirmed, most people like you are losing. Not in theory, not in warning. In fact, cold, mandatory fact. And yet this is the wry punchline. The line of people signing up didn't shrink. The warnings were displayed in noisy neon, shouting risk, shouting ruin, and still, The crowd pressed forward. Why? Because of the same old disconnection. People always believe the statistic applies to someone else. You see a sign warning, 4 out of 5 fail, and your brain whispers, sure, but I'll be the 5th. That stubborn optimism is either brave or tragic, depending on how the story ends. Let's not romanticize it. Plenty of accounts dwindled like puddles under the Sunday high leverage had worked like a fast-moving drain. You'd see a small trader put down 100 units of capital, open a position hundreds of times its size, and watch the screen like it was a roulette wheel. A small move against them, and they weren't in discomfort, they were erased. It wasn't drama stretched over hours. It was sudden vanishings, like candle flames in a gust. Lower leverage slowed the bleeding, extending survival time. But longer survival didn't automatically mean greater wisdom. Here's the rub. Structures shape emotions. Give someone explosive leverage, and they behave like adrenaline junkies. Yank most of that leverage away, and behavior shifts not because the person has transformed, but because conditions force slower pacing. Lower leverage doesn't eliminate recklessness. It just eats up more time for luck to correct, or for mistakes to drag on. In essence, it dulls the danger, but it also dulls the thrill. Where traders once felt like gladiators in a lightning pit, they were now closer to clerks in a dull office, counting carefully before signing a check. Did this change save people? The numbers said otherwise. Even with new rules, the majority still lost money. That fact carved away the illusion that the system itself was the problem, because the system had been reshaped. But the outcomes didn't turn golden. And that's because no regulation changes the internal machinery of your decisions. The market isn't just math. It's also psychology. And psychology doesn't reform because of a policy announcement. That's where the insight lies. The rules can protect you from bleeding out instantly, but they can't save you from your own mind. You can reduce the speed limit on the road, but if you jerk the wheel dumbly into a ditch, lower speed doesn't rebuild the car. External laws reduce risk. But internal discipline defines survival. The playing field can be smoothed, the odds clarified, the warnings displayed in black letters. But if you can't steady your own hand, the crash finds you anyway. The well-intentioned part of regulation was never about guaranteeing success. It was about forcing eyes open. Just like mandated warnings on cigarettes. You may still light up, you may still inhale, but now you do it, knowing, not pretending, that harm lurks with each pull. Brokers displaying their clients' failure rates worked the same way. It stopped the market from being painted entirely as a gold rush. It let everyone see that gold often turned to dust. What's most striking is how predictable the aftermath was. Even armed with warnings, tabulated losses, scaled-down leverage, traders kept making the same emotional mistakes. The compulsion to chase, to hold, to double down, to hunt patterns in noise all remained. Those wounds didn't close because external rulebooks shifted. The psychology was untouched. And as long as the psychology stayed messy, accounts stayed vulnerable. That fact doesn't flatter anyone. It's sobering. You notice something deeper in that realization. Structures like leverage levels don't just shape outcomes. They shape how you times feel, times about decisions. High leverage breeds euphoria and panic in rapid succession. Low leverage creates a quieter, slower rhythm, demanding patience most lack. Both conditions reveal something core. Your reaction, not the rule, dictates your survival. Remove the seatbelt from a driver, and they panic. Secure it, and they settle, but the hand still holding the wheel determines the path. So, when you ask, do rules save traders? The answer is blunt. Rules protect margins. They slow implosions. They expose illusions. What they cannot do is implant the one trait that matters, self-restraint. That doesn't come by law, it comes by habit. It's not the external label that keeps a trader safe. It's the internal law, the one written in your own responses to fear, greed, boredom, and hunger for thrill. That's the mini payoff regulators quietly remind us of. External limits are scaffolds at best. They buy time, curb excess, offer space for awareness. But lasting success doesn't spring from scaffolds. It springs from your own self-regulation. The laws you enforce on yourself, not the ones stamped in government ink, will decide your wealth or ruin. And now, speaking of self-discipline, let's leave the small accounts with flashing warnings behind for a moment. Let's climb up into the upper tier, where the stakes weigh heavier, the numbers stagger more, and where every decision carries the weight of entire families, firms, and reputations. Let's meet the high-stake trader. Word count, 987. 7. What a high-stake trader faces. Think losing $7 a point is stressful? Try 750. Same tick of the chart, same twitch in the market. But the financial swing is no longer the price of lunch, it's the price of a car. That's the scale an institutional trader deals with every single day. Small movements look harmless on the outside, but when you've magnified them through size, they turn violent. It's tempting to believe that money cures nerves, that once you're playing with size and working for the big houses, you're somehow immune. But fear doesn't shrink just because the pay increases. It scales. Put another way, walking a tightrope sprawled 2 feet above grass is fun and harmless. Raise that same wire above a canyon, and the exact same step burns through your legs with a fear deeper than bone. The wire hasn't changed. Only what lies beneath it has. And that's the real picture you miss when you imagine professional traders as cold machines. They don't stride in fearless, stacking millions without sweat. Their fear is alive, possibly louder than yours, because it's not just their own rent and food on the line. It's family well-being, firm reputation, investor confidence. One mistake, one slip. And it isn't a small account blowing up quietly at home, it's public, brutal, tied to names and livelihoods. Consider what that kind of weight does to the mind. Even when you know the system, even when you trust the process, there's still the churn in your gut when downsides hit. A drop lasting mere minutes can peel away what another person earns in a decade. And yet, professionals don't deny it. They don't insist on banishing fear completely. They normalize it. They let it sit beside them like a background hum, never shocking, never silenced, just part of the room. That's the point amateurs forget. Retail traders often dream of someday trading in large size, but they imagine a magical calm will arrive with the upgrade. In truth, the opposite happens. Every nerve is tested harder. The professionals who endure are the ones who accept that fear is permanent, and they train their reactions until those nerves no longer dictate action. They dull the trigger. They welcome the weight but refuse the panic. One trader put it plainly. His amygdala doesn't spike in crises the way others do. It isn't that the fear doesn't exist, it's that he's conditioned himself not to light up with every blow. That conditioning comes from repetition under pressure. At scale, you either adapt or you break. Professional survival depends on making rational choices in moments where the mind screams otherwise. It's not about pretending the losses don't sting. Large size ensures they sting more. Tales circulate of days where a single session erased sums you could use to buy property outright. That pain could twist anyone. But professionals don't anchor their identity to avoiding loss. They anchor it to surviving loss without collapse. They accept randomness more openly, admitting that entries can be indistinguishable from chance. That humility allows them to manage what they can: exposure, capital, and reaction. And here's where the divide between thrill chasers and durable traders shows like a scar. Thrill chasers treat loss as shame. They double down compulsively to erase it. They spill energy trying to be right. Durable traders treat loss as tax. It's paid, it's tallied, but it doesn't consume. The relationship with loss defines them, more than strategy, more than prediction. This mindset isn't born perfect. It's cultivated. You harden through repeated impact, through small doses of exposure until your system absorbs shock without shorting out. Think of military drills. Soldiers practice under noise and flashes so that when the real bombs fall, their muscles don't betray them. High-stake traders build the same rehearsed calm. Markets fling panic their way, and their bodies don't jump. It isn't fearlessness. It's conditioning. Even at the highest levels, losses arrive. Accounts dip. Reputations weather. Some of the most seasoned investors have recorded years of poor performance, stepping back, scaling down, retrenching. The difference is they design for that cycle. They structure teams and strategies with the assumption that downturns will arrive. Where small traders crumble and exit after one drawdown, professional outfits retrench and prepare for the next upswing. Resilience, not omniscience, sustains them. But what about ego? That's the silent killer here. At scale, ego is more toxic because the numbers are massive. One stubborn refusal to cut can wipe entire reserves. So the survivors cultivate humility. They don't pose as prophets of certainty. One professional admitted outright that he doesn't know where the market is headed. His entries, he said, are often random. That honesty flips the script on the amateur myth. It isn't about prediction. It's about shaping position and risk around randomness so that mistakes don't become deadly. That acceptance frees them. They don't chase being correct. They chase not being destroyed. That's why you see professionals outline position sizing with near religious conviction. They carve their downside small so the upside has air to grow. This is their creed. The win rate doesn't matter as much as the risk rate. You can be wrong 6 times if the 7th pays enough and the 6 didn't sink the boat. That's a brutal stoic equation, but it holds. So how do they still win if they also lose? It comes down to shielding themselves from ruin. That's it. It isn't prophecy. It isn't perfect analysis. It's the grinding practice of cutting down exposure, trimming size, diversifying risk, accepting drawdowns without blinking. In doing so, they leave oxygen in the room for profits to accumulate when probabilities swing their way. The gambler leaves no room, he burns every inch of capital in pursuit of the big score. The durable trader waits, the durable trader survives. And note, this doesn't only apply to charts and numbers. At scale, traders manage reputations and entire fund structures. They guard investor trust. They protect the continuity of teams. The game isn't just about a single call. It's about maintaining the machine across cycles of success and drought. That means flexible ego, tight discipline, constant correction. It means treating randomness as permanent landscape, not temporary noise. That's not glamorous. It doesn't look like firework wins. It looks like an unshaken hand ticking loss after loss as entries fail to land, yet the system remains intact. Then, when the tide swings, the intact structure carries their capital upward. They aren't chasing stories of calling the top or bottom. They're telling the quieter story. We survived long enough to capture the upside. At size, the job feels less like fortune-telling and more like construction. Building walls around the fire so it can warm without burning the house. Managing loss like a craftsman rather than a gambler. And the people who endure decades in this business know one secret above all. It's not about silencing fear. It's about befriending it, sitting it at the table, and ensuring it never takes over your hand. That is the split between high-stake trading and casino chasing. One normalizes fear, molds it, channels it. The other denies it, until denial becomes ruin. And that clarity sets up the next truth perfectly. Because once you accept loss, once you scale fear without breaking, what comes next is the even harder pill. The markets do not reward mastery alone. They operate on a bitter medicine called randomness. And humble acceptance of that fact is what separates endurance from ego. Word count, 987. 8. Humility. Before chaos. What if I told you a series of coin tosses could still make you rich? Sounds absurd, right? Flip after flip, heads or tails, no pattern, no prophecy. Yet if you control how much you stake on each toss and accept the randomness, rather than trying to beat it into order, you can walk away with more than you started. That's the strange, humbling truth of markets. They often look less like scripted storylines and more like coin games stretched out across years. Here's the problem. People crave certainty. They want someone to point at a chart and say, "There, that's the bottom." Or, "Tomorrow it'll hit this exact peak." We love exactness because it feels safe. It flatters our sense of control. But the reality refuses to play nice. Markets shrug off precision calls. Movements often look like static on a television screen. Within that noise, traders still hunt omens, wanting clean answers. Reality laughs quietly, handing them turbulence instead. This craving for certainty pushes people into dangerous territory. The gambler convinces himself he can forecast the exact spin of the wheel, doubling down as if prediction is his shield. The trader carried away by ego sketches elaborate prophecies into charts, treating each ratio like holy writ. But the numbers don't owe you that. The truth which most resist admitting is that you can succeed without being particularly accurate at all. That fact flips the whole debate. Take an example. Imagine a trader who's right only 4 out of 10 times. On paper, that sounds like failure. But if every losing trade is cut short through discipline, and every winning trade is allowed to stretch out just a step longer, that same trader ends up ahead. Not because foresight turned gold, but because survival trumped ego. Managing the downside, rationing how much you risk, that's the part that makes the difference. A modest edge, paired with strict guardrails, beats reckless accuracy any day. It's basically poker. You don't need to win every hand. You just need to avoid going bust while the odds gradually play in your favor. The pro knows when to fold early, lose the small stack, and wait for the right opening. The amateur clings to every hand like a personal prophecy and bleeds chips until none remain. The poker table is a perfect echo of markets. The goal is longevity, not drama. This mindset requires a shift most traders never make. Professionals stop thinking of themselves as seers staring into fog. They don't try to be Nostradamus. They think in terms of odds and probability distribution. Each trade isn't a chance to call the future. It's an iteration in a long series where the math plays out over time. Being humble enough to accept that randomness holds sway is what gives them the stamina to last. It's not glamorous, but it works. And that humility is crucial. Because when you approach markets as a prophet, every wrong step becomes a wound to your ego. You can't stand being wrong, so you double down, break your own rules, and spiral into ruin. When you approach as a probability manager, a loss is just part of the sequence. It hurts financially, sure, but it doesn't corrode your identity. You expected it, planned for it, contained it. Which trader do you think lasts longer? Even big names have practiced this philosophy. One approach often cited was simple. When conditions looked poor, capital was pulled back, leverage reduced. As the line went, "We deleverage when we are not making." It's a small, almost boring phrase. Yet behind it lies a state of mind. Accept bad runs, shrink risk, preserve capital. The ego-driven gambler would scoff, demanding action, demanding to win every round. The disciplined trader shrinks, survives, and waits. That quiet discipline doesn't go viral, but it pays the bills. You start to notice that success in markets feels less like conquest, more like endurance, like wearing down chaos by refusing to be broken rather than pretending you can control it. Humility here isn't just a virtue, it's a tool. It strips ego out of the equation and centers survival. When you accept you're not in charge of randomness, you can focus on the one realm you actually control, your own exposure. Consider the illusion of control. Humans stare at noise and insist they see designs. Traders do the same with candles and bars. It feels empowering. But the data, if you're brave enough to look, shows that most lose despite their elaborate systems. Why? Because those systems promise certainty in a place where certainty doesn't exist. They trade like prophets, full of conviction, empty of structure, and the market happily punishes them. In contrast, seasoned traders play a different game. They size their bets with care. Each position is small enough that a loss doesn't destroy them. They keep stop orders in place to cap damage. They trim leverage during weak spells. Each move looks conservative, almost dull, compared to the fireworks gambler. Yet this conservatism creates breathing space. Upside still exists, but it happens without the looming threat of total collapse. That shift lets the randomness churn without ending your participation. It's a form of stoicism in action. You don't argue with the storm. You shorten the sail and wait. You don't demand the coin land heads. You play as though tails appear half the time, knowing you'll still be afloat when heads finally pile up. That's humility before chaos. An acceptance that the ocean is bigger than you, that storms arrive regardless of your strategy. Your real power is restraint, not prediction. Look at the difference in psychology. The gambler enters each round hoping to be affirmed as smartest, sharpest, undeniably right. The disciplined trader enters each round expecting to be wrong often, and yet fully prepared for what wrong means. Which of those two mindsets can withstand a string of bad luck? Which of them comes out whole when volatility stretches for weeks? Clearly, it's the one that normalized randomness instead of fighting it. So, the mini payoff here is crystal. Humility plus sound money management beats ego-driven certainty. Accuracy feels nice, but survival feels better. Being right strokes your pride. Staying in the game compounds your balance. The first feeds your ego, the second feeds your future. That's the choice standing before every trader. Do you want to be Nostradamus, or do you want to be solvent? And now that raises a sharper question. We've been circling around it, but here's where it bites. In markets, is the purpose to be correct, or is the purpose to profit? The answer decides everything. Word count, 987. 9. The purpose is not to be right. What feels better, being correct or being richer? It sounds simple, but that split has wrecked more trading accounts than bad tools ever did. Plenty of people step into the market convinced that what matters most is foresight, the ability to point to a chart and say, "I knew this was coming." It flatters the ego, it builds identity, it feels powerful, but the market is a brutal mirror. It doesn't reward your pride for long. The truth is, equating success with being right poisons your relationship with risk, because when you build your identity around accuracy, every mistake is treated not as math, but as humiliation. And when you feel humiliated, you fight back. Traders double down not because they calculated odds, but because they couldn't admit to themselves that they were wrong. That need to be right is the same mindset that drives someone to keep pouring coins into a machine, convinced the next pull will validate them. Accounts don't just shrink under this pressure, they implode. Picture the scene. A trader buys in, market dips. Instead of taking the loss, they add more. I can't be wrong. It's bound to turn. The dip deepens. They pile in again, fighting the chart with bigger weight each round. What's happening isn't rational adjustment. It's damage control for the ego. Soon enough, the loss is monstrous. Not because of the original trade, but because of the stubborn insistence on being correct. That ending comes not with an elegant exit, but with margin calls, panic, and silence. Ruin dressed as conviction. The irony? You don't enter this arena to prove you're a prophet. You're here to grow capital. The aim is not validation, but survival and expansion. Tom, a high-stakes trader, put it starkly. The purpose of trading is to make money, not to be right. It sounds almost rude to the ego, but it's the hardest truth you'll ever need. If your inner drive hinges on accuracy, you're already misaligned with the actual goal. Capital doesn't care for validation. Capital only cares for protection and growth. Think of it like surgery. A surgeon finds a patient, guesses the disease correctly, brags about their diagnostic instincts, but then fumbles the procedure and the patient dies. Do we cheer them for being right about the diagnosis? Of course not. The only count that matters is whether the patient lives. Trading runs on the same grim logic. Guessing right once or twice pads the ego. But if the capital dies, your correctness means nothing. Over and over, veteran investors echo this. Interviews reveal the same refrain. Profit trumps correctness. The outcome matters more than the forecast. And it's not because they're defeatist, it's because they learned the hard way that markets are not predictable machines built to flatter your brilliance. They're turbulent systems where ego is shredded. Those investors survived not by clinging to being right, but by retrenching when losses came, cutting risk, protecting principle. One described his team's approach plainly. We never endanger the principle. You notice the humility there. The pride lies not in being a prophet, but in still having the means to play tomorrow. That humility carries lessons. When markets turned ugly for them, they didn't lash out or insist on stubborn calls. They examined positions, scaled down, moved responsibly into areas that offered diversification. The philosophy remained unchanged. Protect the base, aim for growth where possible, but the strategies flex to match conditions. That's not weakness, that's endurance. Success measured not by correctness, but by refusal to court extinction. And what's underneath these practices? A recognition that the brain loves stories. Your mind craves neat arcs, outcomes that prove your foresight true, signals that cast you as clever, but markets shred those stories. Most participants lose not because they lacked strategy sheets, but because their own mind became enemy number one. They saw patterns where none existed, clung to illusions, and doubled down to avoid being wrong. The discipline that saves you isn't about proving illusions accurate. It's about ignoring that urge entirely. Tom noted that this constant trap ruins most. 75 to 90% lose money, not through the absence of technique, but because human nature sabotages them. This number stings precisely because it reveals what tools can't fix. The software isn't broken. The setups aren't exotic secrets. The failure is deeply human, and the cure is equally human. Change your inner dialogue. Stop demanding accuracy as validation. Start demanding process as survival. That inner dialogue matters more than any chart. Instead of whispering, "I must be right," train yourself to say, "I must survive." Instead of, "This pattern proves me," learn to think, "This trade must not endanger me." It sounds small, almost trivial, but repetition builds identity. Over time, Your sense of success shifts away from validation and toward preservation. You stop chasing the thrill of ego wins and start caring about staying liquid. The best traders don't hide the mess. They confess that losses are frequent, that randomness runs the show, that entire months lean choppy. Their victory isn't accuracy. It's measured survival across cycles. Think of it like farming. You don't brag because you predicted the exact timing of rain. You survive because you planted carefully, built irrigation, and hoarded enough stored crop to carry you through drought. Markets play on that same seasonal uncertainty. The humble farmer prospers. The arrogant prophet starves. Change the goal, and the psychology changes with it. Stop treating loss as shame. Treat it as tax. Normal, built-in, expected. Tax doesn't end your existence. It reduces your pot slightly while leaving you intact. A paid loss is simply a line in the ledger, not a scar against the ego. Once you can see that, you're freer. You can bleed small, controlled points across losses without the compulsion to prove yourself right. That freedom is priceless because it keeps you alive for the big wins that matter. So what's the deeper philosophy here? It isn't foresight worship, and it isn't perfectionism. It's endurance. It's the cold awareness that you don't need to be right to grow. You need to not be destroyed when you're wrong. The math is plain. A lone big gain outweighs multiple small losses, but only if you preserved capital to catch it. Ego throws that balance into a shredder. Discipline preserves it. The mini payoff isn't glamorous, but it's liberating. Shift the dialogue. Say to yourself, I don't need to be right. I need to survive. I need to grow. Let the prophets waste time in doom-scrolling accuracy contests. Your job is not to win arguments, but to keep your capital intact, resilient across the ups and downs that crush ego worshippers. And here's the creeping truth. Endurance doesn't rest solely in individuals. Survival at scale often pivots on teams, structures, and shared responsibility. Even the seasoned players speak about leaning on groups, about removing the solitary weight of prediction and spreading it across collective systems. Because in the long game, resilience isn't just personal training, it's the architecture you build together. Word count. 987. 10. Resilience and the long game. Imagine a career not defined by steady triumph, but by alternating waves of bounty and drought. Some years you feel like the cleverest person alive, capturing outsized returns. The very next, you stagger through setbacks that slash confidence and force a rebuild. That's investment reality. Forget any dream of constant upward drift. Real trajectories don't trace a smooth line. They swing, lurch, stumble, and only make sense when stretched across decades. Even legends admit this pattern. The public imagines charts pointing forever north, but those celebrated long-term averages disguise nasty jolts underneath. A fund may report 30+% returns over its lifetime, yet behind that tidy average hide years crawling at 5% and others erupting to 100. The mathematics of average is soothing. The lived experience? Nothing steady about it. You bounce from feast to famine, then famine back to feast, and that's the tension. Market success looks clean when printed in a report, but up close, it is chaos disguised as arithmetic. Say you review 10 years of trading history. The arithmetic mean looks impressive, suggesting calm mastery, yet hidden inside are patches where nothing worked, followed by outlier booms that dragged the mean higher. The picture of genius is painted by survival long enough to preserve capital through lean stretches so that when fortune swung upward, you were still seated at the table. Winning, then, is not linear. It is secular, where time periods of loss are as vital as time periods of profit. The ability to absorb rough years, to retrench, to keep funds active despite hardship, that is what defines the survivors. Anyone can look brilliant during hot streaks. The professional's edge is found in enduring the drought years without torching their account or collapsing under pressure. Think of it like a marathon carved across uneven ground. If you imagine a sprint on a paved track, you miss the reality. Real trading careers resemble marathons that snake through valleys, stretch across hills, drag through mud. Some stretches are downhill, bliss you float. You gain speed with little effort. Then you turn a corner and the incline hits. Breathing tightens, pace slows, doubts grow. The key is never running out of road when the course tilts against you. Endurance, not brilliance, sets the finishers apart. Research on resilience tells the same story. Investors who built decades of success didn't manage mythical foresight. What they managed was humility. They admitted randomness, stayed adaptable, combined luck with discipline. George Soros pointed clearly to this tension. His fund's long-term average was strikingly high, yet inside it were years of humble 5% returns, and others stretching to 100. A perfect reminder that averages mislead. Outcomes were spiky, irregular, uneven. The secret wasn't constancy. The secret was surviving the unevenness. When pressed, Soros didn't pretend it was genius on tap daily. He pointed to rough patches, like the start of 1995, where opportunities existed, yet his fund could not capture them. Stress mounted. They had to re-examine, recalibrate. The lesson wasn't about avoiding difficulty. It was about managing through. He used the phrase, "a very responsible job," highlighting something overlooked. Trading other people's money amplifies fear. In response, he didn't chase risk to prove himself. He retrenched. He reduced exposure. He protected capital so the fund could breathe until opportunity aligned again. That retrenchment is vital. Imagine standing in a storm. You have a sailboat thrust forward at speed. Do you keep every sail up, praying skill and destiny carry you through? Or do you shorten sail, slow down, and wait out the squalls? Soros described exactly that response. In difficult patches, they cut leverage. They reduced risk weight. They refused to endanger their principal. And by doing so, they lived to sail through calmer waters that followed. This concept extends into personal practice too. Tom, a high-stake trader, recalled an enormous loss that hit on Christmas Day in a thin market. The timing stained the memory, but the lesson was clear. Losses are permanent companions. Markets don't respect calendars. Managing those inevitable hits, absorbing them into your ledger rather than denying them, is the foundation of resilience. Without that mental framework, each loss becomes trauma. With it, each loss becomes tax painful, but payable. You see the common thread. Whether an institutional giant navigating billion-dollar positions or a lone trader experiencing ruinous holiday shocks, the survival mechanism remains the same. Reduce leverage when conditions sag. Accept the inevitability of error. Reassess positions, reevaluate strategy, adjust to conditions rather than insisting on personal prophecy. Adaptability plus humility, that's the toolkit. Adaptability often looks boring. Soros described reevaluating every position during hardship, tilting the focus toward individual stocks to diversify the fund's exposure. That granular adjustment lacked glamour, but it represented a refusal to cling to one obsolete framework. Contrast this with gamblers who ride a failing system until exhaustion. Adaptability is the difference between being stubbornly correct and being solvent. It's tempting to glorify outlier gains, but the twist here is simple. A trader who survives across multiple cycles beats the one who called a single prophetic shot. An all-in bet that hit once may grant reputation for foresight. Yet that very habit usually ensures collapse the next time fortune turns. The survivors, by contrast, exit bad years battered but bag still intact, waiting for the probabilities to tilt in their favor again. By the end of decades, that resilience overwhelms the memory of anyone's single brilliant call. Resilience is less romantic than prophecy. It lacks fireworks, but it is built brick by brick on humility, discipline, and often teamwork. Few survive entire careers alone. Shared structure, collective reinforcement, team systems, these extend resilience beyond one ego. Together, investors ride cycles that would break lone strivers. Each adds scrutiny, replaces ego with procedure, balances decisions under pressure. It's a quieter kind of strength, yet foundational. So when you scroll across the highlight reels of market geniuses, remember you're often watching averages smoothed for consumption. Behind them are hills and valleys, good years and miserable years. The sign of durability isn't a magical streak, but the refusal to be destroyed when drought seasons roll in. The lesson is not, be right often. It's, protect your principle and prepare for famine so you're alive when bounty returns. That is the long game. Humility before randomness, discipline in risk, community to share the burden. True resilience means you still step forward, scarred but walking, when others have burned out in search of easy glory. And now, survival at this personal level opens into a wider story, because beyond individual practice and team discipline, the entire game is played on a global scaffold. an economic system treated as golden, yet fragile beneath its own weight. 11. The fragile golden age. What if the prosperity fueling all these trades rests on sand? That's the hook we rarely face head-on. We sit in front of glowing screens, clicking buy and sell like little gods of capital. But the floor beneath us could be shifting. Right now, the age we're told we live in is a kind of golden era of capitalism. Rich flows of money cross borders with ease. Companies answer more to stockholders than to states. On the surface, it looks lavish, efficient, permanent, but there are cracks in that golden paint if you tap it hard enough. Look behind the glitter, and the system feels far less secure. There's no global policeman, no single authority holding order the way an empire once did. Instead, there's fragmented governance, competing rules, unstable structures. We've built giant financial towers on a foundation that isn't stone, but shifting mud. Call it a golden age, fine, but remember this: gold shines even when it rests on shaky beams. You can run the comparison back to the late 19th century. That period also had expansive markets and easy movement of money. Empires ran trade routes, gold-backed currency, and rules were enforced at a grand scale. But even that supposedly stable system collapsed into instability. So what does that say for today, where no empire pins the center, and currencies float like balloons cut loose from strings? Our prosperity feels bright and functional, but it's not eternal, as Soros put it. This system is unlikely to last indefinitely, and look at the shift that makes the ground even softer. No more gold standard. Back then, a note was tied to a reserve that anchored confidence. Now currencies drift, rising and falling with speculation and policy. This flexibility grants nations tools but also invites volatility. No compass, no anchor, just constant sway. As a trader, you're swimming in that volatility, whether you choose to or not. The very backdrop of your craft is instability, packaged in ordinary wrappers. What secured stability in earlier eras? England in its imperial peak, playing global policeman. The Cold War, where rival powers balanced each other by sheer force of fear. Those arrangements, however imperfect, gave a sense of boundary. Today, that balance doesn't exist. The absence of a dominant enforcer leaves the entire structure exposed. Without a power to tug the reins, the system trembles. And when system trembles, every trade you place sits risked, not just against markets, but against the structural frame of capitalism itself. Take the failure of international institutions. The United Nations was supposed to serve as a security mechanism, yet its record shows futility at critical moments, leaving gaps that breed uncertainty. Soros compared Bosnia's tragedy to Abyssinia's abandonment under the League of Nations, old echoes repeating new failures. That fracture undermined trust in the very institutions meant to cement order, and once trust fades, confidence in markets runs on inertia more than on foundation. Now ask yourself, what does it mean to speculate, to risk, when the wider game isn't guaranteed? It's like stacking bets in a casino built on a floating raft. At the tables, dice roll. Cards flip, chips pass hands. The games look stable, the lights are dazzling. But beneath it all, the raft tilts on water, shifting with currents, waiting for one unexpected swell. The casino continues until the raft moves, and then the whole spectacle tilts, tables sliding, lights sparking out. Even the biggest players admit as much. They recognize the game itself isn't eternal. This isn't cynicism, it's realism. Empires fell, gold broke, alliances shifted. To pretend the current system is indestructible is comforting, but untrue. That doesn't mean collapse tomorrow. It means fragility lingers at the edge of every move. Traders may speak only of charts and entries, but their backdrop is systemic fragility they can't control. Ignore it, and you're the gambler staring only at the roulette wheel, blind to the cracks in the floor. Look at this through another lens. Money management techniques, position sizing, stop losses, all those tools protect you inside the bubble. But outside, the bubble itself sits inside a wider world that can burst. Politics, wars, governance breakdowns all shove the raft. You aren't gambling only on trades. You're gambling on the system holding long enough for those trades to matter. And that's the bigger humility. Your fate isn't written only by your choices, but by structures you never control. Some argue this fragility sharpens the edge, makes opportunity richer. Volatility means profit if you're disciplined. That's true, but discipline can't outlast collapse if the raft tips over. This is why recognizing systemic risk isn't alarmism, it's survival awareness. You have to hold both layers at once, your personal discipline and the fragility of the backdrop. Both decide whether your portfolio thrives or disappears quietly. Think about the tension again. We label our time golden, yet gold in history often symbolized both beauty and decay. Palaces glittered while foundations rotted. Empires celebrated grandeur right before fracture. This doesn't make gold worthless, it makes it deceptive. The present shines, but don't mistake shine for strength. The floating raft proves it. Games keep going, fortunes rise and fall, until one day you notice water lapping at your feet. The irony is sharp. Traders fuss endlessly about signals on screen, trying to foretell the next tiny cycle, yet barely talk about the longer arc of the structures sustaining their game. They calculate risk per trade, but often ignore systemic risk, the very rules that make playing possible. That silence doesn't erase fragility. It just ensures participants will be shocked when the raft rocks. And here lies the mini payoff. The system you play in, golden as it looks, is not immortal. The background is uncertainty dressed as order. The rules you assume as permanent currencies, alliances, institutions are in fact temporary scaffolds. Even veterans whisper that the stage itself can crack. That admission doesn't end the game, but it should temper how you play. It asks you to hold your gains lightly, to press your discipline harder, knowing the security of the environment is itself unstable. So remember, the fragility isn't hidden. It sits in plain sight. The missing policeman, the drifting currencies, the broken institutions, the power vacuum. Traders spin within this environment, fooled by the closeness of their own screens. But step back, and you see the raft rocking under every move, which brings us back to you, the individual at the screen. Golden lights, glowing charts, hands hovering on keys. You face more than markets. You face your own fear, your habits, and now the possibility that the game's very foundation isn't eternal. And that choice is still yours. Gamble oblivious on the raft, or trade awake, stoic, knowing the ground beneath is never guaranteed. Word count: 987, 12. Conclusion: trading becomes discipline. Gambling stays thrill. One builds structure, the other feeds chaos. The line between them isn't the screen or the tools, it's you. As Tom noted, practice makes permanent, not perfect. Repeat sloppy habits and they lock into chains. Repeat discipline and they form armor. That's the payoff here. Habits decide the outcome. Build badly, and the market exposes you. Build carefully, and it sustains you. If you liked this deep dive, like and subscribe for more nights like this, and ask yourself, are you sitting at the screen to be entertained or to be liberated?